It was a crisp Saturday morning when Jamal Williams walked into the luxury car dealership, his stride confident yet unassuming. Dressed in a simple t-shirt, jeans, and sneakers, he didn't look like the type of person who belonged among the gleaming Ferraris, Lamborghinis, and Bugattis. In fact, the moment he entered the dealership, the staff exchanged quick glances, their eyes scanning him, sizing him up. They couldn't help but assume that Jamal, with his casual attire and relaxed demeanor, was just another customer window shopping. The showroom was vast and pristine, filled with high-end cars that commanded respect, each one a symbol of wealth, sophistication, and success. But Jamal's presence didn't quite match the polished environment. The staff, already accustomed to the usual affluent clientele, immediately assumed that he wasn't there to buy, just a passerby with a dream too big for his reality. Thomas, one of the salesmen, was the first to approach him. His polished suit and perfect smile were standard for someone working in such a luxury setting, but his condescending attitude was not. He had already made up his mind about Jamal, assuming that his presence was a result of curiosity rather than intent to purchase. "Can I help you with anything?" Thomas asked, his voice casual but laced with an air of superiority. Jamal offered a polite smile, the kind that hid his amusement. "I'm just looking around. I'd like to see your top models, if that's possible." Thomas raised an eyebrow, scanning Jamal's casual outfit once more. "I'm not sure that's in your price range, sir," he said, not bothering to hide his skepticism. "But if you're interested, we do have some nice options for those just starting out." Jamal didn't let the comment faze him. He had heard it all before, assumptions based solely on his appearance, assumptions that didn't define who he truly was. He had spent years building his tech business from the ground up, accumulating wealth that allowed him to live comfortably and indulge in luxuries like this. But today, he wasn't here to flaunt his wealth. He was here for something more personal, something he had earned. "I'm interested in your most expensive model," Jamal replied, his voice calm but firm, showing no sign of hesitation. Thomas was taken aback. A subtle shift in his expression gave away his confusion. "The Bugatti Chiron?" he asked, his voice a little more reserved now. "That's a different kind of investment, sir. You might want to reconsider—" "I'm serious," Jamal interrupted smoothly, his voice unwavering. "I'd like to see it." The salesman hesitated for a moment before nodding. Though he wasn't sure what to make of Jamal, he led him toward the Chiron. The sleek, powerful machine gleamed under the lights, as if daring Jamal to prove himself worthy. As Jamal approached the car, he could sense the shift in the atmosphere. The staff, still unsure of what to make of the situation, started to take notice. Jamal was a man of few words, but he didn't need to say much. His presence in that room was more than enough. He wasn't just another customer. He was a person who understood the value of hard work, and in that moment, he was about to show everyone just how powerful quiet confidence could be. The atmosphere in the dealership had shifted, but it wasn't the respect Jamal had hoped for. The staff was still skeptical, unsure of whether he was serious about his request or just another dreamer. Thomas, having led Jamal to the Bugatti Chiron, stood at a distance, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. He couldn't help but feel uneasy about the situation. He had made assumptions based on Jamal's appearance, and now he had to deal with the consequences. Jamal admired the car in front of him, appreciating the design, the power, and the engineering that went into making something so beautiful. But he wasn't here for admiration. He was here to buy, to prove that his success wasn't just about money, but about perseverance, grit, and believing in himself. "I'd like to know more about the Chiron," Jamal said, his voice steady and direct. Thomas hesitated. His experience in the luxury car business had taught him that people like Jamal rarely bought cars like this. The majority of their clientele had the right look, the right aura, and certainly the right status. But Jamal, he was dressed in an everyday t-shirt and jeans, his sneakers worn from use, not the kind of appearance one would expect from someone willing to pay millions for a car. "Sir," Thomas began, his tone shifting to one of patronizing politeness, "this is a car for someone who's not just a customer. It's for a certain type of buyer, a buyer who understands the lifestyle and commitment that comes with it." Jamal looked at him, his expression calm, but there was an undeniable glint of challenge in his eyes. He wasn't going to let Thomas talk down to him. He wasn't going to let anyone underestimate him based on his appearance. He had worked too hard to get to this point. "I understand the value," Jamal said, cutting Thomas off, "and I'm prepared to pay for it." The salesman's facade wavered, the skepticism lingering in his eyes. But he pushed forward, thinking that maybe, just maybe, Jamal would prove him right, that he was just another customer who couldn't afford what he was asking for. He went through the motions, pulling up details on the car's specs, but Jamal wasn't paying attention. He knew all about the Chiron, the power it packed, the speed, the craftsmanship. This wasn't about the car itself. It was about showing the world that appearances didn't define worth. As they spoke, Jamal could feel the eyes of other employees on him. The whispers were quiet but clear enough for him to hear. It didn't take long for him to notice that they were looking at him with a mixture of doubt and judgment. He had seen it before, people assuming he didn't belong, assuming he didn't have the money or the power to back up his words. It was then that Jamal realized the real problem wasn't the car. The problem was the assumptions people made about him because of how he looked. And that was exactly what he was going to change. Just as Jamal was preparing to close the deal, another employee, Daniel, who had been quietly observing the situation, stepped forward. Unlike Thomas, Daniel hadn't judged Jamal from the start. He hadn't assumed he couldn't afford the car. He had simply treated Jamal like any other customer. And now, standing beside him, Jamal felt a sense of validation. "Can I help you, sir?" Daniel asked, his tone polite but not condescending. "Yes," Jamal said with a nod. "I'll take it." Daniel smiled, nodding in understanding, and immediately began preparing the paperwork. The shift in the room was subtle, but Jamal noticed it. The staff, who had once looked at him with skepticism, now exchanged uncertain glances. Thomas, still standing nearby, looked at Daniel with a mixture of disbelief and irritation. Jamal's calm and collected manner had thrown off their expectations. When the deal was done, Jamal didn't just walk away with the car. He walked away with a reminder that assumptions, whether about his wealth, his appearance, or his worth, didn't define who he was. He had proven that he wasn't just another customer in a luxury car showroom. He was a man who had earned his success, no matter how he looked on the outside. And as Jamal left the dealership with the keys to his new Bugatti in hand, he knew he had made a statement, one that would linger long after he was gone. The dealership was eerily quiet as Jamal drove off in his new Bugatti Chiron. His mind was clear, but the events that had transpired were still fresh. He had not only bought the car of his dreams, but had also left a powerful impression on the dealership staff. Jamal wasn't concerned with the judgment from Thomas or the rest of the employees anymore. He had made his point without saying a word. His actions spoke louder than any assumption they could make. The staff, especially Thomas, were left to confront their own biases. The way they had initially sized him up had been a reflection of their own ignorance, not Jamal's worth. For years, they had assumed that only certain people belonged in the world of luxury cars, that wealth could only be recognized by an appearance of affluence. But Jamal's entrance had shattered that belief. He hadn't worn an expensive suit. He hadn't been flashy. But he had shown them that true wealth isn't about how someone looks. It's about what they have earned and who they are. Back at the dealership, the staff went through their daily routine. But the atmosphere had changed. The whispers that had circulated when Jamal first entered the showroom had died down, but the impact of his visit lingered. Thomas stood by the front desk, still trying to process what had happened. He had been convinced that Jamal was just another dreamer, a casual visitor with no intention of making a purchase. But now he stood there wondering how he could have been so wrong. Daniel, who had witnessed the entire transaction, quietly approached Thomas. "You were quick to judge him, weren't you?" he asked, his voice soft but firm. Thomas looked down at the desk, unwilling to meet Daniel's gaze. He didn't have a response. He knew that he had made a mistake, but admitting it out loud was another matter entirely. "I didn't mean to," Thomas muttered, "but I assumed—" "I know," Daniel replied. "We all do it, but we can't let our assumptions control how we treat people. Jamal walked in here dressed casually, and we immediately judged him based on his appearance, but that wasn't who he was." Thomas nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping. He had always prided himself on being professional, but today had been a lesson he wasn't prepared for. "I guess I just thought—" He trailed off, realizing there were no excuses. He had acted based on a stereotype, and it had backfired. Daniel gave him a look of understanding. "We all have biases, but we can choose to be better." Jamal was a reminder of that. As the days passed, the staff at the dealership began to reflect on their treatment of Jamal. They had seen firsthand how their assumptions had almost cost them a sale, and the realization that their judgments had been wrong was difficult to swallow. But it was also an opportunity for growth. They started to talk more openly about their biases and how they could change their attitudes moving forward. Meanwhile, Jamal continued to enjoy his new car, but he also carried a deeper understanding of the lessons he had learned through the experience. He hadn't just bought a car, he had used the moment to challenge the way people viewed others based on superficial appearances. He had proven that wealth wasn't something that needed to be flaunted. It wasn't about what people wore or how they looked. It was about how they carried themselves, how they treated others, and what they had earned through their hard work. Jamal's visit to the dealership had left a lasting impact, not just on the employees, but on himself as well. He had always believed that actions spoke louder than words, but now he understood just how powerful a simple act of kindness could be. The days after Jamal's purchase were filled with the usual routines of life: work, meetings, and time spent with his family. But something lingered in his mind. The feeling that the people at the dealership hadn't truly understood the lesson he had inadvertently taught them. He didn't need to prove anything to them, but he had left them with something more valuable than a commission, a reminder that wealth and respect weren't things to be assumed. One afternoon, as he was driving the Bugatti through the city streets, a thought struck him. He had no real reason to go back to the dealership, but he felt like he needed to. He wasn't looking for an apology or validation. Instead, he wanted to make sure that the staff understood the broader message of the encounter. It wasn't about the car, it was about the respect that should be afforded to anyone, no matter their appearance or background. The dealership was quieter than the first time Jamal had visited. It was midweek and the showroom was practically empty, with only a few employees lingering around. As Jamal pulled up in his Bugatti, the familiar faces of the staff looked up, some of them stunned by the sight of the car. This time, they weren't judging him based on his clothes or the way he walked in. They knew who he was, and they remembered the lesson. Thomas was the first to approach him, his expression more subdued than before. Gone was the dismissiveness that had characterized their first interaction. Now there was a sense of respect in his posture, and it was evident in his voice. "Mr. Williams," Thomas said, walking toward him, "I just wanted to thank you again for your purchase. And, well, I owe you an apology." Jamal raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Apology?" he asked, stepping out of the car. Yeah, I judged you well, based on everything I shouldn't have, Thomas admitted, his face reddening with embarrassment. I assumed things about you, and I'm sorry for that. Jamal nodded, appreciating the sincerity of Thomas's words. It's all right. It's easy to make assumptions. But it's important to realize that appearances aren't everything. Thomas smiled sheepishly. I get that now, and honestly, I've been thinking about it. We've all been thinking about it. Jamal was curious. What do you mean? Thomas glanced around, making sure no one else was listening. A lot of us here, well, we've talked about how we treated you when you first walked in. It wasn't right. And I've heard some of the others saying they want to be more mindful about how we treat our customers, about how we don't judge them based on what they look like or what they wear. Jamal was impressed. It wasn't often that people took responsibility for their actions, especially when it involved something as ingrained as bias. He could see that Thomas wasn't just offering an empty apology. There was genuine reflection in his words. I'm glad to hear that, Jamal said. It's important that we all learn from our mistakes. But the most important thing is that you understand it's not about what someone looks like. It's about who they are and what they've done. Thomas nodded, clearly taking the words to heart. I understand. We've all been talking about making some changes, not just with our customers, but with how we view the world in general. I don't want to be someone who makes those assumptions anymore. Jamal smiled. It wasn't a smile of superiority, but one of understanding. That's all anyone can ask for, growth and awareness. As Jamal walked back to his car, he felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. It wasn't about the car or the money. It was about making a real change, however small it might be. By taking a simple step forward, by just being who he was, Jamal had begun a ripple effect. The staff at the dealership had learned something important, and though it might take time for all of them to fully change, Jamal knew that he had made a difference. That was what truly mattered. He didn't need their validation. He didn't need to be praised for his wealth. He had come here to prove a point, and in doing so, he had shown them what true respect looked like. And that, he realized, was worth far more than any car he could buy. As the days passed, Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that his visit to the dealership had made an impact, but not just on the staff. It had made an impact on him as well. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he had made a difference. It wasn't just about the car, the money, or the status. It was about something deeper, something that went beyond material possessions. He had seen firsthand how easily people could be judged based on their appearance, and how that judgment could hold them back, not just in the eyes of others, but in their own eyes as well. Jamal wasn't naive. He knew the world was full of prejudice and bias. He had faced it all his life. But what had been different this time was how he had handled it. He didn't retaliate with anger or confrontation. He didn't try to prove something through words or flashy displays. He simply let his actions speak for themselves, and in doing so, he had shown everyone, including himself, that there was more to him than what met the eye. Over the next few weeks, Jamal continued to visit the dealership. He didn't need another car, but he made it a point to stop by every now and then. He didn't want to be seen as just the wealthy buyer. He wanted to build relationships, to show the staff that there was more to him than his wealth. And bit by bit, he began to notice changes in how he was treated. Daniel, the employee who had treated him with respect from the beginning, became one of his closest contacts at the dealership. They talked about cars, yes, but they also talked about life, about the struggles people faced and the challenges they overcame. Daniel, who had once been a quiet observer, had begun to open up. He, too, had learned from the interaction with Jamal. He realized that his own biases, ones he hadn't even known existed, were affecting how he treated people. It wasn't just about cars and sales. It was about people, their stories, and the respect they deserved. One day, Daniel approached Jamal after he had picked up some car-related paperwork. He looked different, more confident, more open. "You know, I've been thinking," Daniel began, his tone thoughtful, "about what you said the other day, about how we judge people without really knowing them." Jamal nodded, not needing to hear more to understand. "Yeah, it's something we all do, whether we realize it or not." "I've noticed it in myself," Daniel continued. "I didn't even know I was doing it, but I guess I've been guilty of making assumptions about people based on what they look like or how they present themselves." Jamal smiled. "It's not an easy thing to admit, but it's the first step. I've learned the same thing over the years, though it took me longer than I'd like to admit." "I just wanted to thank you for the lesson," Daniel said, his voice sincere. "You've made me realize that there's more to a person than their appearance, or what I think I know about them. It's about who they are on the inside." Jamal nodded again, this time with a deeper understanding. "It's something we all have to work on every day. I'm still learning too." The conversation lingered with Jamal long after he left the dealership that day. He realized that while he had initially thought he was teaching the staff a lesson about judgment and respect, it was actually him who had learned the most. He had grown from this experience, not just in terms of how he was treated, but in how he saw the world and how he interacted with it, and it felt good to know that in some small way, he had made a difference in someone else's life. As Jamal drove home, the afternoon sun casting long shadows on the road ahead, he thought about how far he had come. He had worked hard to build his wealth, but this journey of learning to be a better person, of shedding the assumptions and biases that clouded his judgment, was the real reward. He wasn't just buying cars or living the life he had always dreamed of. He was becoming the man he had always wanted to be, someone who treated others with respect, who saw the value in everyone, no matter their appearance, background, or status. It was a lesson that Jamal would carry with him for the rest of his life. The months following Jamal's purchase of the Bugatti Chiron had brought unexpected changes. Not only had the dealership staff transformed, but so had Jamal. His interactions with people, especially those from different walks of life, were now filled with a deeper sense of respect and humility. He was no longer the person who assumed the worst of others or felt the need to assert his power through wealth. Now his wealth had become a tool for helping, not a badge of superiority. Despite his growth, Jamal was soon faced with a challenge that would test all the lessons he had learned, the true test of his character. One afternoon, while at a business conference, Jamal encountered an old acquaintance, Robert, a well-known businessman who had a history of elitism. Robert was the kind of man who believed his success defined his worth, and he made sure everyone around him knew it. The two hadn't spoken in years, but when they saw each other across the room, Robert made his way over with a smile. "Jamal, you look different," Robert remarked with a smirk, eyeing him from head to toe. He wasn't commenting on his physical appearance, but on his demeanor, which had changed since their last encounter. Robert had known Jamal during his early days in business, when he was still trying to climb the corporate ladder. Back then, Jamal had been more eager to impress, more focused on showing off his success. "I've learned a lot, Robert," Jamal said, offering a polite but restrained smile. Robert raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "Learned? It's good to see you've come around. But I'll tell you this, no one's going to respect you if you start letting them think you've softened. You've got to keep your edge. People like us, we've earned our place, and we've got to remind them of that." Jamal could feel the old, familiar rush of anger rise within him. This was the type of conversation that would have once sparked a fierce rebuttal. He could have easily brushed Robert off with his wealth, reminding him who had the more expensive car, the bigger business, the better lifestyle. But Jamal had come a long way since those days. He wasn't the same person who would let his pride dictate his actions. "Actually, Robert, I don't need to remind anyone of that," Jamal replied calmly, his voice steady. "People who matter respect me for who I am, not what I have." Robert's smile faded, and he looked Jamal over, sizing him up. "You're still the same guy, aren't you? Just hiding behind a nicer suit. But that won't change the fact that people will always judge you by what you've got." Jamal met Robert's gaze without hesitation. "I don't care how people judge me. What matters is how I treat others, and how they treat me in return. That's the real test." Robert scoffed, obviously not expecting such a response. He opened his mouth to say something, but Jamal raised his hand, signaling the end of the conversation. "I've moved beyond this, Robert," Jamal said, his tone final. "I don't need to prove myself to anyone anymore. Not to you, not to anyone." The tension between them lingered for a moment, but Robert, realizing he was getting nowhere, merely nodded curtly. "Well, good luck with that, Jamal." As Robert walked away, Jamal felt a sense of clarity he hadn't expected. He wasn't angry anymore, nor did he feel the need to assert his dominance. Instead, he felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that he had resisted the temptation to fall back into old habits. In that moment, he realized that true strength wasn't in what he could show the world, but in what he could overcome within himself. The rest of the conference went smoothly, but the encounter with Robert had given Jamal something to think about. The old temptations to prove himself, to fight for status, still lingered in the background. But each time they resurfaced, Jamal reminded himself of the lessons he had learned: respect for others, humility, and the understanding that true success wasn't about how others saw him, but how he saw himself. As the conference wrapped up and he drove home in his Bugatti, Jamal knew that he had passed the true test. It wasn't about his car, his wealth, or his success. It was about the growth he had achieved within himself and the knowledge that he could continue to grow, regardless of the challenges that came his way. Weeks passed after Jamal's encounter with Robert, but the lesson he had learned during their conversation stayed with him. It wasn't just about standing up for himself, but understanding that true growth came from within. As he continued to focus on his business, he noticed something shifting in his life, something that wasn't related to his work or material success, but to the relationships he was building. Jamal had always believed that his success would speak for itself, but now he understood that his actions spoke louder than anything else. He started to treat every interaction as an opportunity to show respect, kindness, and humility. As he did, he began to notice the ripple effect it had on the people around him. One afternoon, Jamal attended a local charity event, an annual gala that brought together leaders from different industries. He had been invited as a guest speaker to discuss the importance of innovation and leadership in today's world. When he arrived, he was greeted by many familiar faces, some of whom had once been skeptical of him due to his background. But this time, the reception was different. The respect he received felt more genuine, and for the first time, Jamal realized that he wasn't being judged based on his wealth or status. He was being appreciated for who he was as a person. As he walked through the event, Jamal noticed a familiar face in the crowd: Daniel, the salesman from the luxury car dealership. Daniel had been one of the few who had treated him with respect from the beginning. Jamal smiled and made his way over to him. "Jamal, I didn't expect to see you here," Daniel said with a grin, his tone warm and welcoming. "How have you been?" "I've been good, Daniel, and it's great to see you here too," Jamal replied, shaking his hand. "You doing well?" "Yeah, I've been great," Daniel said, glancing around. "You know, I've been thinking a lot about what happened at the dealership, about how I treated you when you first came in. Honestly, I was one of those people who had all these assumptions about you. I didn't realize how wrong I was." Jamal chuckled, nodding. It happens. We all have biases, but the important thing is to recognize them and do better. I appreciate your honesty. Daniel's expression softened. I'm glad you think that. It's been a learning process for me. And I've got to admit, seeing how you handled the whole situation, well, it's changed the way I see things. I've been thinking more about how I treat people, and I realize now that respect goes a lot further than I ever realized. Jamal smiled, feeling a sense of pride. That's the thing. It's not about money or status. It's about how you treat others, how you make them feel valued. That's what really matters. As the evening continued, Jamal spoke with more people who, like Daniel, had started to change their perspective. He realized that his actions were not just transforming his own life, but were slowly beginning to affect those around him. People who had once seen him as just another wealthy businessman were now seeing him as someone with character, someone who cared deeply about treating others with dignity and respect. The ripple effect of Jamal's growth wasn't just personal, it was beginning to spread throughout his community. People who had once judged him by his appearance or his success were now rethinking their own assumptions. And as Jamal continued to set an example through his actions, he found himself becoming a leader, not just in his business, but in his community. By the end of the evening, Jamal realized that this was the true measure of success. It wasn't about the cars he owned or the money he made. It was about the relationships he built and the positive impact he had on others. And as he left the event that night, he knew that his journey was far from over. There was still much to learn, but with each step, he was getting closer to the person he aspired to be. The weeks following the charity gala were a whirlwind of new opportunities for Jamal. His business was thriving, his relationships growing stronger, and his newfound sense of purpose seemed to be guiding him in every aspect of his life. He had become more focused on helping others, offering mentorship to younger entrepreneurs, and using his resources to support causes that mattered to him. Yet, despite his success, Jamal knew there was still work to be done. One afternoon, he received a phone call that would test the principles he had worked so hard to embrace. The voice on the other end was from a business partner he had known for years, someone who had always seemed to have Jamal's best interests at heart. But this time, the conversation took a turn that made Jamal pause. "Jamal, there's a new investment opportunity," the partner said, his tone smooth and persuasive. "A property development project in a rapidly growing area. The returns are going to be huge, and I've got a chance for you to get in early. All you have to do is sign the papers, and we'll make a fortune." Jamal listened carefully, sensing the excitement in his partner's voice. The offer was tempting, but something didn't feel right. He had built his wealth through careful investments, hard work, and ethical practices, and he wasn't about to jeopardize that for a quick payoff. "That sounds interesting," Jamal said, his voice steady, "but I need to know more about the project. Where's the land? Who's involved? I need all the details before I make any decisions." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, followed by a shift in the tone. "Look, Jamal," his partner continued, "I've already done my due diligence. This is a sure thing. Trust me on this. We can make a lot of money." Jamal's gut told him something was off, but the temptation was still there. The deal could be big, and the money could be life-changing, but he knew that his success wasn't built on shortcuts or risky ventures. It was built on integrity and long-term thinking. "I'll need some time to think it over," Jamal said, his voice calm but firm. "I don't rush into decisions like this. I'll get back to you after I've looked into it more." He hung up the phone, feeling the weight of the decision pressing on him. The offer was tempting, but it didn't align with the values he had come to embrace. Jamal wasn't just interested in making money, he was interested in making a difference. He had worked hard to establish a reputation as someone who operated with integrity, and he wasn't about to throw that away for a quick profit. The next few days were filled with self-reflection. Jamal met with his financial advisors, scrutinizing the details of the deal. He dug into the project's background, asking tough questions and demanding transparency. What he discovered confirmed his suspicions. The project, while promising, was built on questionable practices and would have a negative impact on the local community. There was no way he could be a part of it, not without compromising everything he had worked for. Jamal picked up the phone once more, dialing his partner's number. "I've done my research," Jamal said, his tone resolute. "I'm not comfortable with this project. I'm pulling out." There was a moment of silence before his partner spoke, frustration evident in his voice. "You're making a mistake, Jamal. This could have made you a fortune." "I'm making the right decision," Jamal replied calmly. "Money isn't everything. I can't be a part of something that goes against my values. I'm out." He hung up the phone, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. It wasn't about the money. It was about maintaining his integrity, something that had become more important than any business deal or investment opportunity. As Jamal reflected on the decision, he realized that true success wasn't about making the most money. It was about making the right choices, even when they were difficult. And in that moment, he knew he had passed another test. A test of integrity. Jamal's decision to pull out of the investment deal had been one of the most challenging choices he had made. But as time passed, he saw the far-reaching impact of that decision. His commitment to integrity had cost him a potential fortune, but it had also brought him something far more valuable: peace of mind and the respect of those around him. Word of Jamal's decision quickly spread, especially within his business circle. Those who admired his success now saw him as not only a savvy entrepreneur, but also as a man of principle. His ability to say no to a tempting but morally questionable opportunity was a lesson that resonated with others. And as Jamal attended various business events and networking functions, he noticed a shift in how people interacted with him. They weren't just interested in his wealth or accomplishments. They were interested in his values. At one such event, Jamal found himself in a conversation with a group of young entrepreneurs. They were eager to learn from him, not just about business strategies, but about the importance of building a brand that stood for something greater than profits. "Mr. Williams," one of them said, "I've been following your journey for a while now. The way you've built your business with integrity, despite all the challenges, it's inspiring. I want to do the same, but it's hard. The pressure to take shortcuts is everywhere." Jamal smiled, understanding the weight of those words. The pressure is real, but what you need to remember is that shortcuts don't last. They might get you something quickly, but they won't sustain you in business. Your reputation is everything. And once you compromise that, it's hard to get it back. The young entrepreneur nodded, visibly absorbing Jamal's advice. "But how do you deal with the temptation? With opportunities that seem too good to pass up?" Jamal paused for a moment, reflecting on his own experience. "You have to ask yourself one simple question. Is this the kind of business I want to build? Will this decision help me sleep at night? If the answer is no, then the opportunity isn't worth it, no matter how much money is on the table." His words hung in the air, and the group of young entrepreneurs seemed to absorb the lesson deeply. Jamal didn't know it, but his experience, his refusal to compromise on his values, was shaping the next generation of business leaders. They were beginning to see that integrity wasn't just something nice to have. It was the foundation of long-term success. The ripple effect of Jamal's decision continued to spread. His story was picked up by business magazines and online platforms, where it was shared as a shining example of how integrity and success could coexist. Jamal had become a role model not just for aspiring business people, but for anyone looking to make a meaningful impact in their field. As his influence grew, Jamal found himself invited to speak at conferences and events, where he could share his story with an even wider audience. Each time he spoke, he emphasized the same principles: hard work, respect for others, and above all, the importance of sticking to your values. But it wasn't just about speaking at events. Jamal had begun to take a more active role in mentoring young entrepreneurs, offering them guidance not only on business strategies but also on how to navigate the inevitable challenges that came with maintaining one's integrity in a world that often valued profits over principles. Through his actions, Jamal had created a legacy that went beyond his wealth. His reputation had become one of trust, respect, and ethical leadership. And as he continued to build his business empire, he knew that he was doing so on a foundation that would stand the test of time. Jamal's decision to turn down a profitable but morally questionable opportunity had not only changed the trajectory of his own life, it had sparked a ripple effect that would influence others for years to come. Jamal's journey had come full circle. From the moment he entered the luxury car dealership, dressed casually and faced with assumptions and judgment, to the critical investment decision that defined his character, Jamal had proven that true success wasn't about wealth, status, or appearances. It was about the principles you lived by and the way you treated others along the way. As his business continued to grow, Jamal remained focused on the bigger picture. He had become not only a successful entrepreneur, but a respected figure in the business community. His reputation for honesty, integrity, and leadership had opened doors to opportunities that were far more valuable than any amount of money. He had become a mentor to many, not just in the business world, but to those who looked up to him for how he carried himself in the face of challenges. One afternoon, Jamal stood in front of a room full of young entrepreneurs, preparing to give a keynote speech at a prestigious conference. The room was filled with eager faces, all hungry for knowledge, ready to learn from someone who had made it against the odds. As he stepped up to the podium, the crowd fell silent, waiting for him to speak. "I'm here today not just to talk about business," Jamal began, his voice steady and clear, "but about something far more important: integrity." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Throughout my career, I've faced opportunities that seemed too good to pass up, deals that promised instant success, the kind of success people dream about. But I've learned that the real success isn't about the quick wins or the flashy deals. It's about building something that lasts, something that's built on respect, trust, and honesty. When you lead with integrity, you build a legacy that not only lasts for you, but inspires those around you." Jamal looked out over the audience, his eyes meeting those of the young entrepreneurs in the room. "I didn't get to where I am by cutting corners. I didn't get here by taking the easy way out. And I certainly didn't get here by letting anyone define who I was, based on how I looked or what they assumed about me. I got here by sticking to my values, no matter how hard it was. And I'm telling you, that's what will make the difference in your journey. The moment you choose integrity, you choose a path that not only benefits you, but the people you influence." The room erupted in applause, but Jamal wasn't finished. He continued to speak about the importance of leadership, community, and staying true to one's values. His words resonated with the audience, leaving a lasting impression on everyone in the room. They weren't just inspired by his success, they were inspired by his character. As the conference came to an end, Jamal was approached by several young entrepreneurs, each eager to hear more about how they could implement his principles in their own businesses. Jamal took the time to listen, offering advice and sharing his experiences. He knew that the true impact of his journey wasn't just about what he had achieved, but about what he could give back. That evening, as Jamal sat alone in his office, reflecting on the day's events, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had spent his career building a legacy not just of financial success, but of integrity. And now he was helping to shape the future of others, teaching them that success wasn't just about the money, it was about the values that guided them. Jamal's journey had not been easy. He had faced judgment, assumptions, and obstacles. But through it all, he had remained true to himself, proving that wealth, success, and respect could be achieved without compromising one's values. His legacy wasn't just in the businesses he built or the cars he owned. It was in the lives he touched, the people he mentored, and the message he spread about the power of integrity. As Jamal closed his office door for the night, he knew that he had made the right choices, that he had walked the path of true success. And that, he thought with a smile, was worth more than any business deal or luxury car ever could be.